The ship cracked through the clouds like a burning blade, cutting open the sky as the Turkle war vessel descended toward Earth. It blocked out the sun, its black metal hull radiating with energy and weapons that had vaporized cities across galaxies. For them, this was just another conquest, another weak world to crush and bend and bleed. The commander of the Turkle stood tall in the bridge, his 6 eyes scanning the green and blue planet below. He sneered, not out of disgust, but out of boredom. They had been labeled the ultimate Deathworlders by the Galactic Council. Their homeworld was a place of fire, acid storms, and creatures that could kill gods, yet they survived. No, they thrived. They believed no species could ever match their brutality, their dominance. Until now, they saw Earth as nothing more than a backwater primitive rock, unworthy of their fear. They would take it in a day, maybe 2, and then move on to the next. The drop pods launched fire, streaking behind them as they slammed into a grassy valley near a forest. The doors hissed open, and Turkle warriors stepped out, towering creatures of muscle and armor, breathing in the new air with contempt. But there was no panic, no fleeing civilians, no military resistance. There were humans standing nearby, watching them calmly. No weapons, no defenses, just watching. One man in particular stepped forward. He was old hair, white skin, wrinkled, but his eyes held no fear. He walked up to them like they were lost tourists, not galactic nightmares. The Turkle captain laughed and raised his plasma rifle in warning. Speaking in a voice like grinding metal, he told the old man to kneel, to obey, to surrender. The man just shook his head and said, "Leave, you do not belong here." Confusion rippled through the Turkle ranks. The translator confirmed the message was accurate. One warrior stepped forward, grabbing the man by the collar, intending to throw him aside, but before he could even react, the old man's hand moved fast, like a viper. His fingers crushed the alien's wrist and twisted it backward. The Turkle screamed a sound no human should have been able to draw from their kind. The warrior fell to the ground, clutching his shattered arm. The others hesitated, unsure if this was some kind of trick. The old man turned around and walked back to his people, calm as a breeze. The humans didn't cheer, didn't shout, they simply stood taller, more of them, emerging from behind trees, from inside homes, men, women, even children, standing as if this was not the first time monsters had landed on their soil. And it wasn't because humanity had known war, had known pain, had bled for centuries, and always stood back up. The commander growled and ordered full deployment. Tanks rolled out, mechs rose from the earth, their weapons glowing with death. Humans scattered into the forests, into hills. But it wasn't retreat, it was repositioning. The Turkle set up bases, scanning for threats. Finding none, they grew more confident, but their tech began acting strangely. Their sensors glitched, their drones lost contact, shadows moved just out of view, and then it began. One by one, their patrols vanished, scouts never returned. Armor was found torn open, not by plasma or blades, but by crude weapons, stone, and steel, yet with surgical precision. The Deathworlders started to doubt. Maybe they miscalculated, maybe this was not the weak planet they expected. The commander denied it. He refused to believe primitive apes could be a threat. He declared that they would crush the resistance in hours, and sent his best units deeper into the terrain. But what they found were traps, not lasers or bombs, but simple earthborne traps, spikes, ropes, pits, all hidden with frightening efficiency. His best soldiers screamed through the cums before silence took them. The commander reviewed the footage over and over, and what haunted him was not the loss of life, it was the faces of the humans that attacked. Emotionless focus. They fought like creatures born in pain, but aiming for something more, not chaos, but protection. They were defending this planet, not just with strength, but with purpose. The Turkle had never seen this before. They had destroyed strong civilizations before, but never one that smiled in the face of death, never one that refused to blink. When fire rained from the sky, the commander stood on a ridge watching the horizon, smoke rising from one of their fallen camps, and he felt something strange, not fear, not yet, but something deeper, something he couldn't name. He looked around. His men were restless, their confidence cracked. The Deathworlders had landed, but this world did not bow, and in the silence of the wind came a sound, soft but clear, a human whistle, calm, steady. Then it vanished, and in its place a single word from one of his lieutenants, whispered with disbelief, "We are not the Deathworlders." Heresy morning came with thick fog rolling over the trees and hills like a silent ghost covering the alien drop zone in a gray curtain. The Turkle commander paced along the edge of their camp, his massive feet crunching the soft earth. The sensors still failed to map the terrain properly. Drones kept disappearing, as if something was swallowing them whole. His second-in-command approached, armor-dented eyes, tired, reporting that 4 more scouts were lost last night, and no trace was left behind. The commander grunted, not in surprise, but in anger. His voice growled through the translator, as he demanded answers, demanded retaliation, but there was no target, no face, no open battlefield. Just this eerie silence and the whisper of leaves shifting in the wind, then movement ahead. Shapes through the mist, not alien, but human, 3 of them. Walking down the hill slowly, a woman with a rifle slung across her back, a man with a scar running down his face, and in the middle, a teenage boy who looked like he had just walked out of school. The Turkle raised weapons, aimed, plasma rifles locked. But the three did not flinch. The woman raised her hand not to surrender, but to greet. The scarred man carried a white cloth stained with red, and threw it toward the ground near the Turkle line. It was not a flag, it was a message, a warning. The commander gave a signal, and his soldiers surged forward, surrounding the humans, forcing them to the ground, locking heavy chains around their limbs. But the humans laughed. The boy even smiled and said, "You just made a mistake. You really don't understand where you are, do you?" The commander leaned in close, towering over him, and asked, "What makes you think Earth is different?" The woman spat blood and whispered, "Because we know how to lose and still win. You lot never had to bleed for every inch of your land, have you?" The commander said nothing, staring at the humans, their bodies weak, their tools outdated, but their eyes, something was in their eyes. Something he had never seen in a prey species before, not desperation, but experience. His soldiers dragged the prisoners to the center of the camp, placing them in an energy cage. The humans said nothing more. They just waited, not with fear, but with certainty. And when night fell again, the sky cracked with thunder, but there was no rain, only the sound of the trees rustling. The Turkle perimeter guards stood alert, weapons ready, but one by one they began to hear things, sounds that made no sense, voices whispering their names, even though no human knew them, laughter echoing from the treetops, heavy stumps behind them that vanished when they turned around, and then came the smoke. It drifted into camp, not from fire, but from herbs, burning from afar, creating illusions, shadows dancing between tents and eyes glowing in the dark, shapes that ran too fast to track. The commander activated full defense mode, lights lit the area, loud sirens screamed through the camp, and still something moved. Just outside their reach, he watched the monitors flicker with static, the thermal readings overloaded, as if something was messing with their tech, not something, someone. He stormed toward the cage to confront the prisoners, but they were gone. The chains lay melted, and the ground beneath the cage was broken open, revealing a narrow tunnel freshly dug. Panic spread. The Turkle ranks were disoriented, scattered, unsure where the next attack would come from, and then it hit a wall of sound, drums, hundreds of them beating in rhythm from every direction, shaking the ground, filling the air with vibrations that echoed through the bones of every Turkle soldier. The humans were playing with their minds, not with weapons, but with fear. The commander screamed orders, demanding his army regroup, but it was too late. The chaos had started. Fires lit up the edges of the camp, explosives triggered by tripwires, homemade traps built from nothing more than rock and metal, but placed with the precision of military engineers. One by one, Turkle soldiers were ambushed, dragged into the woods, their screams cut off fast. The commander charged into the center, trying to gain control. When he saw it, a banner raised by the humans near the edge of camp, painted with a single image, a skull with roots growing from it, and beneath it, a phrase written in English, "We were born from death." He realized then, this was not random, this was coordinated. This was war, but not like he had known it, not the glorious charge of battle, not the honor of open fields. This was human war, invisible, patient, merciless, and he understood what the old man had meant. They were not afraid because they had already lived through worse. They were not desperate because they were not new to this pain. They were not weak because they had learned to suffer and survive. And then something worse happened. His men began to flee, not from orders but from instinct. Their pride shattered their belief in Deathworld dominance crumbling. He looked up to the trees and saw them, figures moving through the fog, fast and silent, not soldiers but hunters, not prey but predators. The humans had turned Earth into a battlefield, and now it belonged to them. Wind howled through the broken remains of the Turkle outpost as dawn struggled to rise over the forested hills. The once mighty Deathworlders now moved like shadows, broken and afraid, their armor scuffed, their weapons low on charge, and their spirits shattered. Their commander stood in silence, overlooking the scorched earth of their former camp. It had been a massacre, but not the kind they understood. There were no human armies, no tanks, no fighter jets, just traps, tactics, and terror. He turned as one of his lieutenants stumbled toward him, bleeding from a wound that had no source. His voice trembled as he reported, more squads missing, more equipment stolen, more silence from the edges of their scanners. The commander growled, trying to muster control, but even his voice felt smaller. Now the forest watched him, and he knew it. And then came the word: deserters. Some of the younger Turkle had broken off during the night, fleeing into the hills, abandoning the mission, abandoning their code. They were Deathworlders. They did not run, they did not break, but this planet was doing something to them, something worse than war. It was crawling into their minds, stripping them down, turning predators into prey. The commander clenched his fists and declared they would retaliate. They would bring destruction. They would show these humans the price of resistance. But his own words felt hollow. The jungle itself seemed to mock him, as if the planet whispered back, "Try." Then the screaming started again. Another patrol gone, another signal lost. The commander sent drones high into the sky, hoping to see an enemy formation, but what he saw chilled his blood. Below, in the valley, a single human stood beside a bonfire, not hiding, not retreating, a teenager with no armor and no weapon, just a wooden spear in one hand and a wolfhound at his side. He waved, not out of surrender, but as if welcoming them to a game. The commander ordered a strike, a gunship sword, toward The human target locking its missiles and then the feed cut out. The explosion did not come. The wreckage of the ship was later found wrapped in vines, its engine pierced by sharpened stones, no signs of human life nearby, yet clearly they had done it. No energy weapons, no advanced sabotage. Just raw knowledge of terrain and patience and nerve. The young Turkle soldier named Sarek watched all this from the shadows, once proud and eager, now confused and shaken. He had been raised on stories of Turkle's superiority, how they were born in flame, trained in suffering, evolved on the harshest world ever known. He had believed no species could match them in fury, but the humans were different, not because of their technology or strength, but because of their will. They refused to break even when outgunned. They refused to fall, even when cornered, and worse, they never stopped. Learning every attack they made showed more precision, every move, more understanding of how to dismantle Turkle systems. They were adapting faster than any species Sarek had seen, and that scared him more than any plasma blade. He approached the captured drone station and pulled up hidden surveillance logs, videos taken during night raids, faces of humans, young and old, working in silence, faces covered in dirt, eyes filled with fire, none of them professionals, none of them trained soldiers. Yet every one of them fought like they had nothing to lose, or maybe they had everything to lose, and that made them unstoppable. The humans knew death, but they did not fear it. They had lived with it, sat beside it, laughed in its face, and so when it came they fought back, not because they wanted to win, but because they could not allow defeat. Not here. Not on Earth. Sarek watched one clip over and over. A human woman dragging a wounded Turkle out of a burning trap, lifting him over her shoulder. Even as bullets flew around her, she should have killed him. He was her enemy, but she saved him. The woman had no armor, her arm was bleeding, but she smiled and told him softly, "You are not the worst we have seen." He had not understood her words then, but now he did. Humans did not fight for domination. They fought for survival, and when survival was secure, they fought for others. They were not Deathworlders, not in the way Turkle were. They were something deeper, older, wilder. The forest belonged to them, not just in body, but in spirit. Sarek made his choice. Quietly he began transmitting messages back to the Turkle homeworld, but not the ones the commander approved. He sent warnings. He sent truths. He told them that this war could not be won, not because Earths had stronger weapons, but because the humans were not just defending land, they were defending meaning, legacy, memory. They were fighting with ghosts behind them and dreams ahead, and nothing scared a Deathworlder more than a species that fought with love in its bones. As night fell again, Sarek stepped away from the Turkle camp and into the trees. He was not sure if the humans would kill him on sight, but he needed answers, and maybe, just maybe, they would talk, because if he could understand why they fought, maybe he could understand how they had already won. Sarek moved through the forest slowly, his armor deactivated, his weapons sheathed, his heart pounding not from fear of being hunted but from something worse. The shame of everything he had once believed, falling apart around him. He was a Turkle soldier, born to conquer, trained to kill, raised to dominate. And now he walked like a guest on a world that had stripped him of that identity. He followed no signals, no maps, just instinct, drawn by the soft sounds of human movement, rustling, leaves, distant voices, and firelight. He found them not a fortress, not a base, but a simple camp built with rope, wood, and trust. A group of humans sat around a fire, sharing food, sharpening weapons, passing glances that held no panic, only readiness. Sarek stayed hidden, watching for hours until a woman looked directly at him. Without turning her head, she spoke, calmly telling him, "If you wanted to kill us, you would have tried already. Come out and explain yourself slowly." Sarek stepped into the light, his arms raised, his helmet removed, his eyes showing something that no Turkle should ever show: confusion and curiosity. The humans did not shoot. Instead, they made space around the fire. A young girl even offered him a piece of fruit. He did not take it, but the gesture shattered something inside him. The woman introduced herself as Sarah. She spoke plainly, telling him that they knew who he was, what he was, but they also knew something else, that no species could remain a monster forever unless it chose to be one. Sarek asked her why they resisted so fiercely, why they fought without the tech or numbers or hope, and she laughed softly and said, "Because this is home, because everything we are lives in the soil, the stories, the bones, under our feet, and if we do not fight for it, we are nothing." She pointed to an old man sharpening a blade, and said he lost 3 sons to invaders. He still gets up every day and builds. She pointed to a child tying knots in a rope and said she saw her town burn and still hums when she works. She pointed to a photo nailed to a tree showing soldiers in old uniforms and said, "These were my grandparents. They taught me how to stand when the world falls." Sarek listened as the night stretched on. Stories filled the air, tales of battles, not just of guns and blood, but of staying human through darkness. He realized Earth was not a death world because of its danger, but because of how it demanded growth through pain. It taught survival, not through conquest, but through connection. Sarah took him to a ridge overlooking the valley below. Torches lit trails forming strange symbols, ancient ones, she explained. Carved by ancestors to send messages through light, she said this was how humans warned each other long before satellites or radios. It was how they united even when scattered across continents. Sarek stood in silence watching humans below move. In perfect rhythm, no command, no overseer, just trust. He had never seen a military like this, no ranks, just purpose, and something stirred in him, a question that terrified him. What if strength was not just in muscle or weapons? What if strength was in remembering who you are, even when the world tries to erase you? He asked Sarah why they didn't wipe out the Turkle. Now why not strike while they were broken? She looked at him with tired eyes and said, because that is not what humans do. We defend, we do not destroy. We teach even when it costs us. She handed him a data crystal filled with footage, images, documents, and said, show this to your people. Let them see, let them understand. We do not want slaves or victories. We want peace, but we will never kneel again. Sarek took the crystal and turned to leave, but before he stepped away, he asked what happens if they ignore this, if they return stronger and more ruthless, and she replied simply, then we will remind them again and again and again, because Earth is not a place you conquer, it is a place you survive if you are worthy. He returned to his camp that night. The guards noticed something different about him, not just in posture, but in spirit. He was not trembling. He was calm, and when the commander demanded answers, he handed him the crystal. Without a word, the commander dismissed it, called it propaganda weak. Sentimental, but Sarek said one thing that made the entire room fall silent. We have been taught to destroy those who fear us, but they do not fear us, and that is what makes them dangerous. More dangerous than any death world we have ever faced. The commander struck him for his words, called him a traitor. But others listened in the shadows, doubt blooming like wildfire in dry grass, and above them in the dark sky the stars shone down, not as distant suns, but as quiet watchers of a world that was waking up to the truth that maybe, just maybe, Deathworlders had finally met their match, not through fire, but through something far more unstoppable, the human. Hearth silence in the Turkle command tent felt heavier than any armor. The crystal sat untouched on the central console, glowing softly as if it carried the weight of something ancient, something sacred. The commander stood rigid, refusing to speak, while outside the camp, his soldiers began whispering stories of the humans, of the traps that seemed to think of their own, of the beasts tamed by laughter and the children who moved like warriors. The cracks were spreading, not from enemy fire, but from inside, from questions, from fear, from doubt. Sarek stood near the edge of the camp, watching the perimeter guards shift nervously, checking scanners that showed nothing and yet feeling everything, shadows moving where no wind stirred, trees bending without sound, torches flickering as if unseen hands played with the flames. The humans were not attacking with weapons now, they had moved on to something deeper. They were attacking the mind, the soul, the very belief system that had made the Turkle who they were, and it was working. Each day brought new signs. A patrol would vanish, and later their equipment would be returned, cleaned, neatly stacked at the camp entrance with a note that simply read, try harder. Strange music played at night, sometimes soft, sometimes wild, never from a direction anyone could trace, and in the morning footprints circled the tents, just human bare feet dancing around their strongest machines. The commander issued stricter orders, curfews, tighter formations, harsher punishments, but it only fed the paranoia, because the more control he tried to force, the more reality slipped through his claws. Sarek met with others in secret, young soldiers who had seen too much, who had watched comrades scream in the dark and then fall silent, who had read the files from the crystal and felt their blood run cold. He spoke not of surrender but of awakening, of understanding that brute force had met its limit, that Earth was not a field to conquer, but a mirror showing them what they feared most: humanity. Not as prey, but as proof that strength could be something else entirely. The forest around them had changed, or maybe they had changed. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper, the sounds of nature no longer passive but active, watching, waiting, responding. Even the wildlife moved in patterns. Number science could decode birds diving in formations that mirrored human signals, wolves leaving remains of alien scouts untouched, but dragging their weapons into strange piles near the river, as if mocking the Turkle. One night the skies erupted with strange fire, not from human weapons but from storms birthed by Earth itself, lightning without thunderclouds that spiraled like eyes above their camp. And in that chaos the humans came not to kill but to speak. Drums echoed from the valleys, messages encoded in rhythm, words carried through the vibration of soil and stone. Sarah appeared at the edge of their walls, again, not hidden, not cloaked, but standing tall, her clothes torn, her arms bruised, her eyes burning like starlight. She called out the commander by name, not with hatred but with clarity, saying, you thought this would be your war, but it is our story and we decide how it ends. She held no weapon, yet none dared to approach her. She spoke of peace, of a chance to leave, of a door still open, but warned that if they chose otherwise, Earth would not stop, would not tire, would not forget, because every stone, every river, every hand on this planet was connected through something Turkle science. could never measure love history, purpose, the commander roared in defiance, ordering his elite guard to strike, but they hesitated, looking at each other, unsure, then slowly lowered their weapons, and in that moment, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was not fear, it was choice. The commander stepped forward, eyes locked with Sarah, and said, "You speak as if you are gods," and she replied softly, "No, we are human, and that is something greater." The wind carried her words through the broken trees, through the trembling ranks of Turkle warriors who now felt the truth in their bones. They had landed on Earth, expecting a victory. They had walked into something else entirely, a world not designed to submit, but to test, and teach, and transform. And as the fires burned low, and the stars watched from above, the Turkle understood that they had not invaded a planet. They had awakened a legend, and legends do not fall. They rise again, and again, and again. Next morning came with no gunfire, no orders, no alarms. The Turkle camp was still but not empty. Soldiers moved slowly, their armor removed, their faces exposed to the cool air. For the first time since landing, the war that had been promised never arrived. Instead, something more powerful had taken hold. Not defeat, not surrender, but reflection. The crystal Sarah had given was now being passed from tent to tent, each warrior watching the footage, alone. Some wept, some trembled, some simply stared, their world, their belief, their identity, unraveling with every human voice, every act of mercy, every glimpse into a species that had mastered not just survival, but something deeper. The commander sat in his chamber surrounded by silence, his hands rested on his knees. Heavy not with age, but with realization. He had led armies across a dozen worlds. He had destroyed civilizations with a single command, but never once had he stopped to understand what it meant to live. Now he did, now he saw that Deathworlders were not strong because they endured suffering, they were strong because they forced others to bow. But humanity did not demand kneeling. It rose from the ground with dirt on its skin, and kindness in its hands, and dared the universe to try again. Sarek entered without permission, and the commander did not stop him. He placed a small object on the table, a carved wooden token, shaped like a leaf, its edges rough, its surface etched with symbols, old human symbols. It had been given to him by a child the night before, after he had returned to their camp again, unarmed. Again, uncertain, the child had said nothing, just smiled and held out the token as if to say welcome. "You are not alone anymore." The commander looked at the token, then at Sarek, and asked, "How did we not see this? How did we not know what they were?" And Sarek answered, "Because we looked down when we should have looked in." They walked out together, past the tired sentries, past the curious stares, past the walls that no longer mattered, and into the open where Sarah stood waiting with others, men, women, elders, children, all with the same calm eyes. The commander approached and removed his insignia, holding it in his clawed hand. He offered it to Sarah, not as a symbol of surrender, but of truth, and she took it gently, saying, "No species is born evil, only blind, and you have seen now the days that followed were quiet, not in the absence of noise, but in the presence of peace." Turkle soldiers helped rebuild the human village, carrying logs, forging tools, learning words and gestures, and in return the humans taught them not just how to live on Earth, but how to live with Earth, to grow food, to read the sky, to tell stories that held pain and hope in equal measure. One night around a fire, Sarek listened to a tale told by a blind elder, a story of a flood, a storm, and a boy who refused to let go of the rope that tied him to his people, even when the waters tried to take him. The elder said, "Strength is not how long you can hold a weapon, but how long you can hold on to your purpose and not lose your soul." Sarek thought of his brothers who had died believing they were the peak of evolution. He thought of those who had fled still chasing ghosts, and then he thought of this camp, this fire, this moment, and felt something new. Not pride, not glory, but peace, real peace. The kind that grows in quiet places when no one is watching. Across the stars, the council received the final transmission, not of war trophies or conquered lands, but of humans sitting beside Turkle warriors, laughing, cooking, singing. Some cried at the sight, others denied its truth, but one voice rose above the rest, saying, "If this is weakness, then let us all be weak. If this is defeat, then let us fall, and rise again as something better." Earth was no longer marked as a target, it was marked as a world of warning and wonder, a place not to be taken but to be approached with reverence and humility. And back on the surface, Sarah stood beside the old man who had first faced the Turkle without fear. They watched children of both species playing near the river, one of them chasing the wolfhound, who barked not in warning, but in joy, and the old man whispered, "They came as Deathworlders, but they left as something else." And Sarah replied, "Yes, they left as students, and one day maybe his brother's sun rose slowly over the hills, casting golden light across the valley, where human and Turkle worked side by side. What once was a battlefield was now a garden. New crops sprouted from the ashes of ruined tech, fresh water flowed where old engines once leaked oil. Children ran between tents made of both alien fabric and human cloth, their laughter a language older than any spoken tongue above them. The skies were quiet, no ships, no threats, just birds flying freely. The Turkle had begun building, not warships, but homes, shelters, schools, and as they built, they learned, not from books, but from the people around them. Every story shared was a lesson, every wound shown was a reminder, every hand extended was a challenge to become more than what they had been. Sarek now walked freely among them, no longer just a soldier, no longer just a witness. He had become something else, a voice that bridged to worlds. Each day, he carved small wooden tokens like the one the human child had given him. Each shape held a meaning, one for strength, one for healing, one for beginning again. He passed them to those who needed them. No words needed, only the act itself, and slowly the tokens began to travel. They crossed the valley, they reached other villages, they found their way into the hands of Turkle warriors, still afraid to believe, still unsure if this peace was real. And when they held the tokens, something inside them shifted, because they remembered the silence of the forest, the hum of human voices, the terror that had turned into awe, and they began to ask, what if we do not have to be feared to be remembered? What if our legacy could be something else entirely? The commander, now older than he looked, sat beneath a tree watching as two children argued over which animal was faster. A human boy said, "The wolf." A Turkle girl insisted on a bird. They both turned to him demanding an answer, and he laughed, a sound that once would have shaken walls, now soft like the leaves. He said, "Neither the fastest is the one who never stops moving forward." And the children nodded, then ran off, still arguing but smiling. The war was over, not by treaty, not by force, but by choice, and the choice had to be made. Every day, each dawn brought new tests, moments where anger could rise, where fear could return, but the humans reminded them again and again, with small things, with shared meals, with songs sung and broken alien words, with forgiveness that burned brighter than fire. And the Turkle answered, not with conquest but with effort. They learned to listen. They learned to plant. They learned to say, "I do not understand, but I want to." And for a species born on a world of acid storms and stone skies, that single sentence was the beginning of their transformation. One evening, Sarah stood atop the hill, where the first drop pods had landed. Her rifle, now only a memory, resting in a wooden box. Beside her, she watched the stars begin to glow. The same stars that once watched her people prepare to die, now bore witness to something greater behind her. Sarek approached, his eyes calm, his steps firm. He stood beside her, holding a final token, carved not like the others. This one was different, round with two lines intertwined, one smooth, one jagged, together forming a path that looped endlessly. Handed it to her, and said, "This is us." She took it, turned it over, and nodded, then placed it on the ground beside a stone marker freshly carved, bearing no names, only the symbol. They both looked at it for a long time, not as a monument to war, but as a promise to all who would come after, that this place had been broken and healed, burned and rebuilt, feared and loved. And above them the wind carried the voices of those who still sang, of those who still remembered, not just how it ended, but how it began, with fire, yes, with rage, yes, but also with a man who refused to kneel, and a girl who refused to hate, and a boy who refused to run, and a people who refused to forget who they were. And because of that, the Deathworlders, who had once ruled by fear, now walked in peace, and they would tell their children, not of the planets they conquered, but of the world that changed them, of Earth. Not a death world, not a paradise, but something stronger, a home. And that was how it ended. Not in silence, not in victory, but in unity. Where once there had been enemies, now there stood something new, a legacy, not written in war, but in understanding, not in ash, but in roots. And the stars above kept shining, not brighter, not louder, but clearer, as if even they had learned to watch with open eyes. Years passed, and the valley changed yet again. What once had been a scar on the earth became a place of gathering, where humans and Turkle met, not to remember war, but to celebrate what followed. They built together with hands that once tore. They sang together with voices that once screamed. They raised children who never knew fear, only stories. And those stories were not of blood or fire, but of choice, of the day when those called Deathworlders became brothers. The symbol carved by Sarek and placed by Sarah became the emblem of the new era, carried on clothing, drawn into sand, painted on walls. It meant unity, not forged by treaties, but by transformations. Sarek, now older, sat beside the same tree where the commander once spoke to the children, his fingers running over another wooden token. Freshly carved, he handed it to a small boy who asked what it meant, and Sarek replied, "It means you belong to both stars and soil." And the boy smiled, running off with the gift, his laughter echoing through the trees. Sarah stood at the edge of a new school, her voice teaching not battle plans, but how to read, how to dream, how to understand a galaxy that once seemed so cruel and cold, and now felt open and waiting. Above them both the stars continued to burn, steady and ancient, but now they were no longer distant lights. They were destinations, paths waiting to be walked, not by conquerors, but by caretakers. And Earth itself remained the heart of that journey, not a fortress, not a weapon, not a warning, but a promise. And every year on the same day, humans and Turkle gathered. Where it all began, they brought stones to add to the circle around the marker, each stone a memory, each step a continuation.